There is a stretch of water between Africa and Arabia known as the Gulf of Aden. Narrow, sun-scorched, and restless. For centuries, it has been one of the world's busiest sea corridors, carrying everything from oil and weapons to food and gold. Every year, thousands of ships pass through, linking Asia to Europe, the Middle East to Africa. But behind its waves lies a darker story, one that began not with greed, but with hunger. In the early 1990s, the nation of Somalia collapsed. The government disintegrated, the navy dissolved, and law became a distant memory. Into that vacuum came foreign trawlers, massive steel monsters that stripped Somali waters bare. They took everything: tuna, shark, lobster, hauling away millions of dollars worth of fish every year. To make matters worse, reports began to surface of toxic waste dumping along the Somali coast. Barrels of chemical sludge and radioactive waste were secretly offloaded into the sea by European companies who saw Somalia's chaos as a convenient landfill. The sea, once a lifeline, turned against the people who lived by it. The fishermen's nets came up empty, their boats rotted away on beaches, and when the cries of protest went unheard, something ancient stirred in the hearts of the coastal clans: revenge. At first, they acted as self-declared protectors. They boarded foreign ships and demanded fines for illegal fishing. They called themselves the Somali Coast Guard. Many villagers even supported them. These were their sons, brothers, and fathers defending the nation's waters. But soon the fines grew larger. The targets changed. Cargo ships, tankers, and luxury vessels all became fair game. The fishermen were no longer protectors. They were becoming predators. By the mid-2000s, piracy of the Somali coast had evolved into a full-fledged economy. It had a structure, a command, and a hierarchy. Small investors funded missions, providing boats, engines, fuel, and weapons. Local informants tracked ships leaving ports in the Red Sea or the Indian Ocean. Pirates learned to read radar, use GPS, and plan attacks with military precision. It was no longer a struggle for survival. It was business. And what a business it became. A single successful hijacking could bring in millions. In 2009, Somali pirates carried out over 200 attacks, seizing ships from every corner of the world. The ransom for one vessel, the Sirius Star, was $3 million in cash dropped from a helicopter. The young men who once fished with handmade nets now carried AK-47s and satellite phones. They went from starving fishermen to millionaires overnight, living in mansions, buying cars, and marrying multiple wives. Yet, behind the illusion of success, the structure of piracy was intricate and shadowy. The pirates were merely the visible face of a larger network. Financiers, sometimes businessmen in Nairobi, Dubai, or even London, provided capital for missions in exchange for a cut of the ransom. Local elders negotiated the division of loot, and clans offered protection for a share. What began as a reaction to injustice transformed into a multinational enterprise rooted in corruption, money laundering, and violence. But the story of piracy didn't end in the East. As the world focused its attention on Somalia, another form of piracy was emerging thousands of miles away in West Africa, along the Gulf of Guinea. Unlike the Somali pirates who hunted for ransom, the pirates of the Gulf of Guinea were after something far more tangible: crude oil. The Niger Delta, a labyrinth of creeks and mangroves, is home to one of the richest oil reserves on earth. Yet the people who live there remain among the poorest in Africa. Oil spills destroyed their crops, gas flares poisoned the air, and the rivers shimmer with the black sheen of leaked petroleum. When anger met opportunity, a new form of piracy was born. Local youths, many of them unemployed and disillusioned, took up arms. They hijacked tankers, tapped pipelines, and siphoned off thousands of barrels of crude. They called themselves freedom fighters, claiming to avenge decades of exploitation by oil companies and corrupt politicians. At first, it seemed like a rebellion, a cry for justice, but soon it became a trade. This was not the chaotic piracy of Somalia. This was organized theft run with the efficiency of a cartel. Sophisticated networks coordinated the operations. Insiders in oil companies leaked shipment details. Navy officers were bribed to look away, and politicians received their share in exchange for silence. The stolen oil, known locally as bunkered crude, was transferred onto waiting vessels under the cover of darkness and sold on the international black market. In a single night, a well-planned operation could earn millions. That money funded more weapons, more boats, and more political influence. Over time, piracy in the Gulf of Guinea became intertwined with elections, militancy, and government contracts. The men behind these crimes were no longer just rebels or fishermen. They were businessmen in military fatigues, operating with quiet approval from the very system they claimed to fight. While Somalia's pirates captured the world's attention with their hostage dramas, the pirates of the Gulf of Guinea operated silently. They didn't need global headlines, only profit. Yet their impact was devastating. The Gulf of Guinea soon surpassed Somalia as the most dangerous sea on earth. Ships vanished without a trace, crews were kidnapped, ransoms paid, and oil stolen in quantities that could cripple national economies. Two different coasts, two different histories, yet both born of the same disease: exploitation, poverty, and the failure of governance. From the Horn of Africa to the Niger Delta, piracy didn't appear out of thin air. It grew out of neglect, out of decades of stolen wealth and shattered promises. What the world calls piracy was, in truth, a mirror, a reflection of what happens when a people are left to drown while others sail past with full nets and full pockets. The sea, after all, remembers everything. And in both the Gulf of Aden and the Gulf of Guinea, it remembers who took, who suffered, and who fought back. Piracy is never just a crime of the sea. It is born on land, in palaces, offices, and oil boardrooms, long before a single boat leaves the shore. What the world sees as ragged men with rifles, boarding ships under moonlight, is only the surface of a far deeper, darker system. Behind the masks, there are ministers. Behind the speedboats, there are banks. Behind every hijacking, there is politics. In the Gulf of Guinea, piracy evolved into a silent industry, carefully woven into the political and economic fabric of West Africa. By the early 2000s, Nigeria, Africa's biggest oil producer, was bleeding wealth. The Niger Delta, where the country's oil flows from, had become a battlefield of greed. Pipelines crisscrossed villages where children drank from oily rivers. Multinational companies made billions while locals waded through poison. Out of this injustice rose a new kind of warrior, part rebel, part thief, and part businessman. They called themselves freedom fighters, but soon their cause became commerce. Oil theft, or bunkering as it came to be known, became the gateway to power. At first, they tapped pipelines with crude equipment, filling makeshift drums and selling to local buyers. But as the profits grew, the game changed. They began working with engineers, ex-soldiers, and foreign traders. Hijacking tankers offshore became more profitable than attacking pipelines, and it required connections that reached far beyond the mangroves. To hijack a vessel, you need more than guns. You need information. You need to know when the ship is leaving, what it's carrying, and which route it will take. That kind of knowledge doesn't come from the sea.
A ship just left now, ship 72134. It's carrying crude oil and it's close to the sea.
It comes from inside the ports, from oil company staff, and from military officers who sell the data for a share of the loot. Many pirates were directly financed by politicians who used them as private armies during election seasons. The same men who claimed to be fighting corruption on camera were silently funding sea crimes behind closed doors. For the politicians, it was simple economics. A share in a single shipment of stolen oil could finance entire political campaigns. Pirates and militants became tools of power, rewarded with contracts, security jobs, or immunity once their patrons won office. In return, they kept the rivers under control, a crude form of local governance through fear and loyalty. And so, the Niger Delta became an unspoken marketplace of blood and oil. While the Navy chased shadows, military boats were seen escorting tankers carrying stolen crude. Communities that dared to speak out were silenced. Journalists disappeared. The oil flowed steadily, not just through pipelines, but through politics, feeding a class of elites who grew fat on the chaos. In the Gulf of Aden, the same dance played out under different rhythms. Somali pirates became global celebrities, poor men holding the world's ships hostage. But the operations were never fully local. The real money came from foreign financiers. Wealthy brokers in Dubai, Yemen, and Kenya acted as silent investors. They bought the weapons, fuel, and satellite phones. They arranged the ransom negotiations and cleaned the cash through offshore companies. Every ransom payment, often dropped in waterproof bags from helicopters, traveled through a network of lawyers, money exchangers, and bank accounts before reaching the pirates. By the time the money returned to Somalia, most of it was already gone, siphoned off by middlemen and warlords. The pirates themselves received a fraction, but enough to keep the cycle turning. Even the ransom system had rules, almost like a business code. Investors got 30%, pirate crews shared 40%, and the rest went to clan elders and local authorities. In areas controlled by Al-Shabaab, a cut of the ransom was taken as tax, funding terrorism with the same dollars that companies paid to save their hostages. The world, without knowing, was financing its own enemy. And while the international community deployed warships to patrol the Gulf of Aden, the real financiers remained untouched. They didn't need to set foot in Somali waters. They sat in air-conditioned offices, managing the spoils of lawlessness. Each hijacking became another transaction in a global chain of corruption that stretched from coastal villages to corporated towers. This is the true anatomy of piracy, a system where poverty provides the soldiers, politics provides the cover, and global finance provides the machinery. In both the Gulf of Aden and the Gulf of Guinea, piracy thrives not because men are greedy, but because systems are broken, because corruption feeds on desperation, because nations with riches buried beneath their soil leave their people buried in hunger. And so long as the poor remain the weapon of the powerful, piracy will always have an army. The Gulf of Guinea's pirates are no longer just sea bandits. They are businessmen with boats. Somalia's pirates are no longer just fishermen. They are franchises of global chaos. Both are symptoms of a disease that begins in politics and ends in blood. And as the money moves upward, from the sea to the state house, the victims will remain the same. Ordinary sailors, fishermen, and the voiceless communities who watch their seas turn red while others count dollars in the dark. Piracy, at its core, is not a sea problem. It is a mirror reflecting everything broken on land: poverty, corruption, exploitation, and betrayal. And nowhere is this reflection clearer than along the Gulf of Aden and the Gulf of Guinea, two coasts that once promised trade and prosperity, now haunted by fear and loss. The numbers tell only part of the story. In the Gulf of Guinea, more than 90% of global ship kidnappings occur. Nigeria alone loses an estimated $2 billion every year to oil theft and piracy. And off the coast of Somalia, even after years of military patrols and international intervention, the shadow of piracy still lingers, like smoke after fire. But beyond statistics lies a deeper cost, one that cannot be counted in dollars or barrels. It is the cost of dignity, trust, and future. When Somali pirates began capturing ships in the early 2000s, the world saw them as villains. But few asked why a fisherman would risk his life in open water, facing warships and storms for a crime that could end with death. The truth was simple and cruel. They had no nation to protect them, no economy to feed them, and no justice to believe in. Decades of civil war had erased the state. Foreign fleets looted their seas, dumping waste that poisoned entire communities. In that vacuum, piracy was not born from greed. It was born from abandonment. But as the money rolled in, the same weapon that once fed hungry families became the poison that destroyed them. Young men who once worked together in fishing crews began killing each other over ransom shares. Entire coastal towns turned into pirate havens, places where foreign cash spoke louder than morality. Children grew up idolizing pirates instead of fishermen. And when international naval forces finally pushed piracy back, they left behind a generation that had known nothing but the trade of violence. Somalia's coasts became quieter, but not healed. Because when the guns go silent and the money stops flowing, the sea still offers no fish, no jobs, no hope. And the world that once came to hunt pirates never came to rebuild what was lost. Across the continent, the Gulf of Guinea bleeds differently, not through ransom, but through theft. Here, oil is both a blessing and a curse. Every drop stolen from Nigeria's pipelines means one less drop for hospitals, schools, and clean water. The money vanishes into offshore accounts, while the communities from which it flows sink deeper into misery. The environmental damage is catastrophic. In the creeks of the Niger Delta, children play in water slick with oil. Fishermen cast nets into poisoned rivers, pulling up more sludge than fish. Crops die from acidic soil, and the air smells of gas flares that have burned for decades without pause. The land that once fed millions now poisons them slowly, a quiet genocide carried out in the name of profit. And yet, behind every barrel of stolen crude stands a network of respectable men, politicians, military officers, oil traders, who sit in meetings, signing papers that make theft look like business. The pirates are just the foot soldiers. The real captains steer from boardrooms. This is the true tragedy of Africa's piracy. It is a crime with two faces. One desperate and barefoot, the other polished and powerful. The world condemns the first and does business with the second. But piracy does more than steal wealth. It steals trust. Shipping companies avoid African ports, driving up the cost of imports and exports. Insurance premiums skyrocket, making goods more expensive for the poorest citizens. Investors stay away, fearing instability. Even tourism suffers. For who wants to visit a coast that headlines call dangerous? And yet, the damage is not only economic, it is psychological. The youth of coastal Africa are growing up in a cycle where crime seems like the only form of opportunity, where the ocean, once a symbol of life and freedom, now whispers of danger and deceit. Where a man's worth is measured not by his craft, but by the size of his ransom or his oil deal. The question then is not how to end piracy, but how to end the world that creates pirates. Because until Africa fixes what is broken on land, it will keep bleeding at sea. In the Gulf of Aden, the cure is not more warships, it is justice. Justice for the fishermen whose waters were stolen. Justice for the children who grew up amid toxic waste and hunger. Justice for a nation stripped of its sovereignty by greed disguised as global trade. In the Gulf of Guinea, the cure is not more security forces. It is honesty, transparency in oil revenue, accountability among leaders, investment in the people who live on the land that produces the wealth. For no amount of naval patrols can stop corruption that begins in the State House. If you look closely, piracy tells the story of Africa itself, a continent rich in resources yet robbed by its own and by outsiders alike. The pirates are merely the symptom. The disease lies in systems that reward theft and punish truth. And until that disease is cured, the waters of Africa will remain haunted, not by ghosts of ships, but by the silence of justice never served. The sea remembers. It remembers the barrels of oil spilled in the delta. It remembers the fish stolen off Somalia's coast. It remembers the lives lost, the lies told, and the fortunes made from misery. And someday, when the tide turns, as it always does, the truth will surface again. Because the waves may bury bodies and wrecks, but they can never bury the story of a continent betrayed by its own riches and of a people still waiting for the day when the oceans bring life.